Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack. We're all on the show. Welcome to your last week without Oregon football for the next 3, maybe 4 months. We'll see. There is college football this weekend, though. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. USC plays this weekend. Notre Dame plays this weekend. Florida plays, or they don't play this week. They play next week. But yeah, we've got college football starting this week. All Saturday we'll have games, and then next week the Ducks are here. So we're in the final week of kind of that. Is it fall camp? Is it not fall camp anymore? Mode for the Ducks. We'll speak with the coordinators, also Dan Lanning, a few select players, and then just, I guess, if you go to duckterritory.com for your Duck news, which I hope you do, you want to remember that on Thursday, the 24th through the 27th of August, there's no media availability. There's no access to practice. That's like they're shifting into game mode, and we're not going to be able to see any of it or hear about it for 4 or 5 days. So we do have some things planned for content on duckterritory.com, and I highly encourage you guys to go and check that out.
Yeah, that's going to be I was just going to say, it's going to be kind of like an extended preview period for us.
Yeah. Yes. But as for that, let's dive into this mailbag because we haven't done one in a while. And I'm pretty sure I looked at the questions that you had available to you, Erik. We had a lot of responses on this one.
Yeah, I was trying to think. Was it right before fall camp that we did the last mailbag? I can't even remember.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
We're going to get back into the flow of doing these on a regular every Monday. We're going to kind of fall in line here in about a week. We're going to fall in line to a very regular schedule for podcasts. We've got it planned out. You'll expect to see, I think, 4 shows per week plus a game recap. Matt, is that right?
Yes.
So expect to see a little bit more consistency on this feed, which I'm sure you guys will appreciate. That also means the season is here, which I know you guys will love even more. But today we are starting with a mailbag because, again, we haven't done these in a while. I was curious to see kind of where everybody's heads were at. We got 5 questions, and we'll start with one from, I believe, a new question asker from @GoDucks5_Mick, who asks, what position is strongest on offense and defense? And is the team better as a whole on defense or offense? I'm going to answer the first part first, and then maybe you guys can answer yours. And then I guess we'll just probably come to a pretty, I would imagine, consensus on that second question. But strongest position on each side of the ball. Offense, I think the clear most valuable and probably just the best player is Bo Nix.
Yes.
So that's probably the right answer. But I think in terms of just the strongest overall unit, I would say running back in terms of just proven depth and playable depth. And there's 3 guys that you feel really good about, 2 guys there that you feel really, really good about. I do think the Bucky Irving, Noah Whittington pairing could be one of the better in the country, certainly one of the best out west. I don't know if there's really a huge amount of competition, or I don't know if there's even that much pushback to that statement. I just think the Ducks are really good there. And that was an area of strength last year. I believe that was my best or second best ranked unit in my season grades a year ago. So I'm kind of sticking there. That group is pretty similar. A lot of the guys are back that were key parts of that. Defense, I went with defensive line. I don't think that will surprise people who listened to kind of my shtick on this before. In part because I was just kind of going through the secondary, and I feel better. So when we do our depth chart projections, I do offense, Jared does defense. I don't even know what you're going to do in the secondary, Jared. There's so many players moving around at so many different spots and so much cross training. I don't envy that one.
I was randomly thinking about it yesterday, just because everybody will see eventually on duckterritory.com, but it's going to be a little difficult. There's like little hints and nuggets every once in a while from a coach or a player, but really, honestly, nothing set in stone. So we'll find out.
Yeah, exactly. So I went with defensive line because I think that was more predictable. I have a hard time just elevating linebacker to the best unit when I think it was clearly the worst unit last year. And while I'm really encouraged by some of the changes, like we haven't seen any of it, I think defensive line is probably the easier choice. So I'm going with that group. I think having Popo back, adding Jordan Birch, bringing back all of these guys that were, again, I know people are critical of how the season ended, of lack of pressure on the quarterback, but overall, this is probably your best unit last year defensively, and I think it will be again this year.
I had the same answers. I think it's running back and defensive line. Just because, for the reasons that you said for the offense, like quarterback, obviously Bo Nix is probably like the best player on the team. At least like if you were to do like a Madden overall rating of everybody, he would be number one. But it's a quarterback room. And I think that's what this question is asking, which position group is the strongest. So I'm going running back. I thought about wide receiver. There's still just some kind of question marks. Excuse me. Like I expect Tez Johnson to be good, but I haven't seen it. I don't like. I really don't have anything in my body that tells me Tez Johnson won't be good and a very contributing member to this Oregon offense. But I just haven't seen it. Same with Trayshawn Holden. Offensive line, I think, is really talented. I think it's going to be definitely not as good as last year, but again, it's very difficult to be as good as they were last season. So I think that they'll be good, but I don't think that they're the best on offense. But running back is legitimately 3 deep. I think Jordan James, if he were to get a lot of carries one game, I think everybody in Autzen or everybody who was watching the game would be okay with it. But when you have Bucky and Noah, I think that's, like Erik said, one of the best running back duos in the country, probably the best out west. I don't really think that there's a disagreement there. So running backs and then D-line, for all the reasons that Erik mentioned. They added depth, added talent, brought back a lot of depth and talent as well. All the freshman newcomers, if there is an injury or anything like that, you got the guys lined up who are, national top 100 kids, national 4-star recruits, guys who were recruited by a lot of schools across the country who decided to come to Oregon. And I think that they'll be just fine. I thought about corners or safeties, but similar to wide receivers, I don't know what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think Kyrie Jackson's going to be good and physical and one of the better cornerbacks Oregon has had in a little bit, but I don't know. I haven't seen him do anything other than stumble bun drills or sideline tackling or stretching for 15 minutes because that's all we get to see at practice. And then for safeties,
who knows?
I just don't know. There's 3 spots, nickel star, and then free and boundary. There's probably 7 or 8 guys that could be starting, could be third string. I don't know. So it's going to be the defensive line. I think that's the most clear-cut answer on defense.
You guys have hammered out. I think we all have the same answers.
Okay.
But I would argue receiver has a chance to surpass running back. And to Jared's point of what he said, though, like we just haven't seen Trayshawn Holden perform. We haven't seen Tez Johnson perform in these scrimmages. But I think a group of Troy Franklin, Chris Hudson, we know what those 2 guys can do. Troy Franklin is one of the best receivers in the Pac-12. That automatically elevates your position group up. I think Chris Hudson is a really solid number 2, could be a really elite number 3 guy if Tez Johnson or if Trayshawn Holden kind of assumes that number 2 spot. And then Jurion Dickey, I feel like, is kind of the wild card here. Does he push himself into the mix where he has to play every single game? He's got to be in that rotation. I think we know a lot of what Bucky and Noah can do. I agree. If Jordan James got a game's worth of carries, his numbers would be pretty good. But I think Oregon's got an opportunity where we could see a pretty special year at receiver because they've got a good quarterback. They've got a run game that you have to really respect and fear. You have to go out to stop it, which opens up the passing game. And if Bo Nix has time to, go through his progressions and make his checks and reads, I think this receiver room could be really pretty darn special. Defensive line, I'm in agreement. And I feel weird saying it, though, because they weren't really good last year at getting to the quarterback. They were really good at stopping the run. But that's only half the game. So I feel way more confident about the offense than I do the defense, if that makes any kind of sense.
It does, and it segues right into the next part of the question, which I think is a consensus that we expect the offense to be better than the defense. Is that fair? Do we need to spend extra time going through that at all?
No, I agree.
No, I don't. I mean, I think both units will be good, but the offense is just going to be way better.
And we should note we're coming off of a scrimmage on Saturday where Dan did say the defense had the upper hand, had some really nice things to say about the way they performed in that. Seems kind of
Did
disappointed,
he?
frankly, of the offense. Well, I guess he didn't give a lot of information. But he was certainly higher on the defense than the offense based upon the limited remarks he was willing to give and the limited details. They tackled better, Jared. You asked that question. I guess we have to hit
They
it
sure did.
head on. What do we want to know specifically? They did tackle better, which was good. But yeah, we are coming off a scrimmage where there was some improvement there, so that's a positive in that direction. I think that the gap between the offense and the defense probably closes a little bit, and that's not because I think the offense takes a big step back, but I'm being optimistic that the defense does get a step better. It really should from just a personnel perspective, second year in the system. But we'll see. Who knows? We might come out of that game in Lubbock saying, this looks a lot like what we saw last year, and that's not a good thing. All right, next one from at U of O 4 Life 84457. I think this person's asked a question before because I think I've incorrectly tried to decipher those numbers. I won't do it again. His question: aside from Mateo and probably Cole, what other defensive high school recruits, if any, will have an impact on D this year? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. Those would be the two I would start with, based upon what we've seen and kind of the vibes around camp. I think Mateo, I don't think he's starting, but I do think that's a name you're going to be hearing early and often this fall, just kind of based upon how the depth chart plays out. Some of the positive comments we've heard. Jordan Birch the other day saying that he thought Mateo's bag was kind of the deepest among the young guys, and a couple moves he really likes. So there's certainly some buzz there. We've talked about Cole, I think, quite a bit. The name I want to throw out, I'm not sure entirely kind of what the availability is, but Tatum Tuioti is another name that's gotten quite a bit of buzz, listed at 6'3", 245. That kind of answered the question we had before about his size. But he hasn't been available at least the two last practices that we watched. So not sure exactly if that's long-term, short-term, but some of the comments earlier in camp were positive. Plays kind of a similar role in terms of that outside linebacker edge spot. So certainly opportunity there. And then I guess maybe there's a true freshman corner that could potentially do something, but there's so many corners. It seems like it's hard to believe that actually happens, despite Demetrius Martin, the corners coach, being kind of, I think he said that they'd push the veterans a little bit, which was encouraging to hear, but I don't know if we're going to see a lot of either Roderick Pleasant or Dalen Austin or any of those guys.
Yeah, I think from the cornerback perspective, I'd be surprised. There would have to be, honestly, like kind of a plethora of injuries, because you do have guys cross-training between star, nickel, and cornerback. So the assumption would be if a cornerback were to be injured, they would probably move one of the guys back from star to corner, and then they don't have to play the true freshman. Maybe you could get a redshirt season out of them. But those are guys, yeah, Dalen Austin, Roderick Pleasant, Solomon Davis, Colin Gill, all the true freshmen over there at cornerback. I don't really see too many defensive line freshmen coming out just because of how deep Oregon's defensive line is. It's really 2 to 3 deep at every position. But yeah, I mean, Tatum Tuioti, we'll see where he is physically. Eventually, he hasn't been in practice the last week or so, or how long we've been there. Blake Purchase, I guess, would be the next guy up in terms of that standing edge rusher, primarily on passing downs more than anything else. So maybe he'll get some run, especially against Portland State, depending on the score. But I don't think there's going to be, kind of like it was last year, I don't think there's going to be a lot of true freshmen who make an immediate impact on either sides of the ball. And if they do, that means that there's going to be a lot of injuries, and that's going to be more worrisome. So I think it'll be last year. I think there'll be 2, maybe 3 guys who make a big time impact, and Mateo and Cole are going to do it on the defensive side. Who it is on offense, I don't know. Maybe Jurion. Maybe to Matt's point, like he could be the wild card there. But yeah, we'll see. Blake Purchase, run of the cornerbacks. That's probably about it in my perspective.
You don't want freshmen stepping up and having huge roles.
Agreed.
Because, like, it's nice if 1 or 2 maybe has some kind of role, or maybe they push their way into the lineup because they're just so good. But you don't want multiple freshmen having to play a lot, because then that means your current roster before them wasn't very good. And you want like a generational type talent to show up and be the reason why he gets on the field, like a Penei Sewell, where it was very evident day one, hey, this guy is different than every other freshman offensive lineman that's come through the program in a very long time. Like Herbert and Troy Dye starting as freshmen, like they were good, but that's not the best case scenario of why you wanted them to play. The teams were bad. And so if you're Oregon, like to Jared's point, I agree. Like I don't think there's going to be freshmen unless there's a rash of injuries or some kind of suspension or something happens that makes upperclassmen unavailable. I think freshmen will play. I think we'll get a handful of guys on both sides of the ball that see action, but because of the rules of being able to play 4 games and then redshirt, still like that's going to have to factor into your, this guy's playing as a true freshman. Yeah, but he also gets 4 games for free. You have to do it. And how do they deploy those? I don't know. But I think Mateo and Cole are probably the 2 most likely. I would have said Tatum Tuioti was the 3rd, but Jared's point, we haven't seen him at practice in a while. So what's the status there? Outside of that, the D-line is loaded with upperclassmen. Maybe a Terrence Green gets in the mix. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or Johnny Bowens. I don't know. Maybe a Blake Purchase off the edge, but that's another group where there's a lot of guys that they have available to them. And then is it more valuable to save those guys than it is to play them a very limited amount of snaps? I do think corner DB is maybe the spot we do see someone beyond Mateo and Cole step up, because there's just so much uncertainty at that position. And that's uncertainty because we just haven't been able to see practice.
Yeah.
Maybe someone shows up in the scrimmages the last 2 weeks and as a true freshman and is absolutely killing it. And it's like, hey, this guy's got to get on the field in some capacity. He's really good. Maybe when we go dime, he's that 4th cornerback that goes on the field, or maybe he has to be on special teams because we need to travel him in case a guy goes down with an injury, and we're away from home. He'd be the next guy up. That's where I would look first. If there's going to be a 3rd freshman beyond Mateo and Cole, I would look at corner and then defensive backs in general.
Just the last thing I'll say, Dan hasn't really, and I've said this before, Dan hasn't really shown a track record. I know it's just 1 year of playing a ton of true freshmen. Like, you can go back and look at last year. I think it was 5 players who avoided redshirt years in that class, and there were some really good players who did redshirt. Think about Devin Jackson, who we're all fired up about this year. Well, he didn't play a lot last year. There are guys like Jilla Tucker, who's transferred since, but I think he was like the 2nd or 3rd highest rated recruit in that class. So there's some talented guys that we were excited to see, that we thought there may be an opportunity for, who didn't get any playing time or enough playing time to burn those years. So I would just be mindful of that. I wouldn't set the expectation going into this year and really in future years for 6 or 8 true freshman players to be playing huge roles. And as Dan's point has been, if they're good enough, they're old enough. Doesn't seem like there's been enough guys that have been good enough the last couple of years. So I'm just a little bit skeptical we get there this year. Even though, I love Devin Jackson as a player. I thought he was going to have a role. I think if we would have rewound and did this exercise a year ago, we might have. I probably would have said, oh yeah, he's a guy I expect to play. And yet he didn't. So we'll see what this year holds. But I think we're all kind of feeling like 2 guys, maybe 3, could get to 4, to Jared's point, if there are some injuries or something that takes place. But I don't think it's going to be a huge number.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll go through the second half of this mailbag. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. 2 questions in. We got a couple more to go.
This one's from a frequent question asker at Nash_Duccaneer. Which player or coach has been your favorite to interview during fall camp? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. Might be a recency bias, but I really like talking to Junior Angilau. What was that, Friday? I thought that was a fun one. He had quite a bit of personality, opened up about some things. I hope he did get to see Barbie on Friday night. He was hoping that would be the team movie choice there. So that was one. Again, that's recency bias. I just really enjoyed chatting with him. He was also a blast to talk to at Media Day. Earlier this month, August 1st. That feels like a lifetime ago. So that would probably be where my head goes first, and then two others that I don't know. This is going to be fun because typically we have a lot of consensus picks. I bet we're going to probably have a lot of different answers here because we've all talked to different people, probably enjoy different things that we've talked about this fall. But the two other I wrote down, Tez Johnson was awesome at Media Day. We haven't chatted with him since, but he told a lot of fun stories, kind of broke down a lot of his relationship with Bo and kind of how much that means, talks about his background and what it's like to be a little guy playing this sport at a receiver, little in terms of broad weight and all that. So I enjoyed that. And then, again, this is probably, I know I'm going to be the only one to pick this, but I did enjoy talking to Luke Basso, the long snapper.
No, I was going to pick him.
Oh, you're going to pick him, Matt? Okay. Well, that was when I was
fired up.
He was excited. He knew this was probably going to be one of his very, very limited opportunities to do this. And he made the most of it. And I thought he made a good impression. He had some good answers and really got into some of the minutia of snapping. So as somebody who always kind of enjoys that part of it, that was fun. So those are the three I picked. I'm guessing you guys will say a couple names that I go, oh yeah, that was really fun too. But that's where my brain went first.
I'm trying to think. I enjoyed talking to Matthew Rigney, punter. Usually specialists are always like a good time to talk to. Same with Basso and Camden Lewis, and Ross James for the most part as well. I enjoy talking offensive linemen as well. Junior was fun. Marcus Harper, I talked to during Media Day. That was a good time. Yeah, I mean, it's hit or miss sometimes with players. It's been fine for the most part. Jamal Hill is always a good interview. He's a funny kid. He just doesn't give you too much information. We haven't talked to Trequez this fall, but I always love talking to him. I don't think I even talked to him during Media Day, so that's a shame. But he's always a good interview. I don't know. I don't have like a lot of them that just absolutely stick out in my head.
I remember. Sorry, Jared. I remember you coming out of Media Day saying Connor Soley was really good.
Connor Soley was really good. Yeah, we have not gotten to talk to him in fall camp.
I enjoyed Luke Basso. That was a fun interview. To Eric's point of like, just he probably knew like this is the maybe only time we're going to talk to him all year, and he hasn't really spoken since he's gotten to Oregon. And so he was fired up for it. And just like you guys have said, special teams guys are always just better. For some reason, I really enjoyed Nishad Strother. I don't know what it is, but
yeah.
I just feel like this is a guy that's like, I wasn't at a school that had all the fancy stuff and everyone kind of dreamed of it. And now I am, and this is awesome. And I'm relishing every moment of it. But then he also kind of gave that comment, I remember back, where he was like, why did you transfer here? You were a starter. Why would you give that up? And he was like, well, I came here to win that job. And, everyone else has that same mentality. And if I don't lose, or if I lose the job, like, congrats to the guy that wins it, and I'm going to be a good teammate, but I came here to win this job. And I don't know. I really like that comment. I just like he's like having fun because he's at a place that he probably dreamed he never thought he could get to. And now he's here. Media Day interview, I really enjoyed Brandon Dorless because he opened up. He's always a good interview, but he was a little bit different. And ironically, I don't think we've heard from him since since the Oregon Media Day. We'll see if we get him this week, but we'll see. And then I know he's boring, but I like Bo. I think Bo gives good answers. It's an easy answer for me to say, but I just like Bo. He straight shooter. Sometimes he's very same along lines of a coach speak, but like really good speaker. And I think if you watch his interviews and you go back and you watch the past great quarterbacks like a Herbert, like a Mariota, he's cut from the same cloth.
I was trying to think of a coach. Again, maybe it's recency bias. We talked to
Elite Terry.
He was great. That was really fun. Joe Lorig gives a lot of information, like really went into, like Jared asked a question, I think, about charting punts, and like he spent 2 minutes like breaking it down into very fine detail. I enjoyed that. It was
nice of him.
Yeah. Because there are certain coaches that will not take the time to do something like that, so I appreciated it. But yeah, I don't know. Those were the two that popped to mind. Drew Maringer, actually, I thought was pretty. I just remember coming away feeling like, oh, there's a lot of different angles in terms of things he talked about from that interview. So those are the ones that sort of popped to my mind first. But do you guys have any other coaches that stood out, or should we move on?
I like Will Stein. I think he's been a welcomed addition into the coaches interviewing circle. Actually think all the coaches are really nice to talk to. Chris Hampton too. Junior Adams I think is pretty good as well. Now we're just listing all the coaches who work for Oregon, but I think all the coaches are fine. I think some kids are sometimes just kind of camera shy and not used to public speaking in front of, I don't know, 7 to 10 people, which understandable. It can certainly be nerve-wracking, but I think all the coaches are really, really easy and really nice to talk to.
I will say I didn't have as big of an issue as some people have this year with Lanning's shortness. I was miffed on Saturday, like we all said, like while we were here, but I also don't think, like, I know people are talking about it on Twitter, like how few of things he revealed after the second scrimmage. But I think Eric and I and Jared were talking about this like the day later, or maybe that night, of just, I just don't think he likes talking without, having all the information available to him. And so I'm really curious to see what we'll get on Wednesday when we speak with Lanning. But yeah, I think Dan is very similar to Chip, but also more forgiving than Chip, and that just takes some adjusting to get, by us, by the fan base to get there. And we do get nuggets here and there from him.
The only thing I'd add is it'd be my preference if he needs a film review to give us good answers.
Don't let us talk to him.
Let's give him a day or two to do that, and then let's review it, because not that it was a poor use of our time, but we sat out there for a while, and I feel like we all kind of felt coming away kind of like, we just really didn't come away with any details. I understand Dan probably is totally fine. I mean, he's totally fine with that. But if it would be beneficial to give it a couple of days for him to kind of get more insight, maybe we do that in future years. I don't know. We aren't the ones making these decisions, so probably not. All right, let's move on to the next question from a new question asker. It was fun on this show. I think 4 of the 5, or 3 of the 5 at least, were people who had never chimed in before. So fun always seeing new names. From @DKatowski44. Does Oregon need to land more 5-star recruits to be viable national champion contenders, even if their blue chip ratio stays high? What can they do to land more and earlier in the cycle to build momentum? Or is it a byproduct of what's available on the West Coast? Good nuanced question about recruiting. Figured this would be kind of a fun one to kind of break down. To the first part, do they need to land more 5-star recruits to be national champion contenders? I think the answer is probably yeah. I think Oregon saw firsthand last year playing Georgia what it looks like to go against a juggernaut. And we have to acknowledge, I think Oregon was 7th or 8th last year in the team composite rankings for 24/7 Sports. I don't have that pulled up in front of me. I probably should have. But Oregon was like on that next level of teams that were supposed to have the best roster. And we saw in the field last year, it wasn't particularly close. And so and I know there's a lot of other factors there. It was Dan's first game of his career as the first game of the season, playing really in the heart of Georgia in front of basically a home crowd for Georgia. So there's some of that, but that stuck with me of like that team. I know Georgia was also just a juggernaut last year, and it wasn't particularly close for most of their games all season. We saw that even in the championship game. But that kind of stuck with me of like, there's another step to take. Like, I think Oregon has an awesome roster. I think Oregon has a roster that can absolutely contend to win this conference, that can absolutely contend to reach the college football playoff. So maybe that's all you need to say to be viable contenders, but to actually win the thing, I'm still a little skeptical that they're quite there. Maybe you guys disagree. I'll be curious to hear. I'll answer that. And then why don't and you guys can kind of chime in there, and then maybe we can talk about things that they could do to improve. Do you guys agree that they need to land more 5-stars to really take that step, or do you think that do you think they can do it this year or next year?
No, I mean, they absolutely do have to add more 5-stars. I mean, the Georgia thing, if you just go back in recent history of national championship winners, it's all Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson, who at the times were all like the top 3 or 4 schools in the country in the blue chip ratios, who were led by multiple 5-star players across both sides of the field. I think it's a pretty easy equation. I think it's pretty simple math. It's like, hey, get the best players in the country out of high school and hope then, player development turns them into the best players in college football. So I think that's a pretty simple equation. And for the second half of the question, the problem lies in the West Coast and the lack of talent in the trenches that is on the West Coast. There is talent out here. Don't get me wrong, but is there as much talent as there is in Texas, as there is in Missouri, as there is in Florida, as there is in Bama and the Southeast? No, of course not. Why do you think Oregon went and got 4 or 5 Texas players last season and 3 or 4 of them were defensive linemen? It's because that's where the better players are in the trenches than they are out on the West Coast. There's pop-up talent like Josh Connolly Jr. a couple cycles ago, Aiden Breland this year, and Brandon Baker this year. But that's, 4 or 5 guys a year. When you go to Texas and there's 10 to 15, it's just different. So in order to compete for national championships, I know like you can bring up the TCU that they went there last season and that they beat a blue chip ratio team in Michigan. I get that. Those are fine arguments, but look what happened when they played Georgia. I just wasn't even close. And I know Michigan had a bunch of coaching issues in their final game of the season. So I just think that it's a very clear-cut equation of get the best kids in the country out of high school and then turn them into the best players in the country in college football.
I don't think it stops with just 5 stars. I don't know the total number of top 100 recruits that Oregon has on its roster because there's a glitch going on the site with the 2021 recruiting class not popping up. But you look at every other class around that one. Oregon has just 8 total players on its roster that are ranked inside the top 100. Alabama had 11 in just the 2023 recruiting class. Georgia had 13 in just the 2023 recruiting class. Ohio State had 7 in the 2023 recruiting class. So to give you an idea of just the talent disparity, and that goes to what Jared was saying, like there's just not a lot of talent out west compared to the South, the Southeast, the Midwest, the Northeast, compared to where Oregon's located. So yeah, like the simple answer is yes, they need more 5 stars. The more in-depth answer is that they need to go out and they need to sign more top 100 players. They just need to recruit better. And that's not to say that they aren't recruiting at a high level, because from an Oregon standpoint, they're continuing the trajectory that Mario Cristobal had, where they're continuing to push for a top 10 recruiting class. They're number 12 right now in the country. But the problem is they have 22 commits and they have 1 guy ranked inside the top 100. And they've got 2 or 3, Aaron Flowers, Dakota Fields, and Iffy, that are all in the top 122. So like they've got 3 guys that are kind of peripheral 100 players, but they need more top 100 recruits, and they just simply need to recruit at a higher level to get to that next threshold. I think they're getting there. I think the talent is continuing to rise, but if they want to make that quick jump in the next year or 2, they need to make a huge jump in the top 100.
And to the question of what can they do, I think it comes to what can they accomplish on the field to start.
Yes.
There needs to be a bit more proof of concept of Dan as the head coach of this program in terms of making a run, of winning a conference championship, of playing, for games that really matter in January. When Dan goes out there and recruit, and again, I want to make sure everybody understands, we think they're doing a very, very good job considering all the circumstances. But when he goes out to recruit, what's he selling them on? Well, he's selling them a lot of stuff that's Oregon-centric, but from his own coaching perspective, it's mostly what he did at Georgia, right? And so there needs to be a little bit more at Oregon. And I'm not criticizing him because he's been here 1 year, but this is just the reality of being a coach trying to establish roots as a head coach. And now, as a head coach, establishing roots on a different part of the country. So I think that's part of it. And then to the point that you guys just made, I think it's a really good one about the West Coast. The margin for error is really, really small to miss on top recruits out West if you're Oregon. Because the reality is, to your guys' point, there aren't as many elite guys, especially in positions that really matter. So you have to win those battles. You have to get Aiden Breland. You have to get the Brandon Bakers. Those are musts, I think, to a certain degree, to try to establish what you're trying to establish. Because the reality is, guess what? They're going up against the big boys for both of these recruitments, right? I mean, we're talking about Aiden Breland. That's an Oregon-Georgia battle right now, according to Greg Biggins. Brandon Baker, think Ohio State, Nebraska. I'm trying to think there's a third one.
Texas.
There you go. Thank you. Those are the schools that are right in there right now for Oregon. These are big time brands. So for Oregon to take that next step, they have to start winning these head-to-head battles against the big boys, even for their own West Coast recruits. And that's difficult because they have to prove that they can really, really win at the highest level. Oregon as a brand has shown that they can play for national championships. They haven't proven that they can win one yet. I don't know if that matters a ton necessarily on the recruiting trail, but Dan has to prove that he can do so. And then the other thing is that they have to be able to go win on in other parts of the country a little bit more. I think they've done a heck of a job, to Jared's point, of landing a bunch of 4-star recruits from Texas that are on the defensive line. Hitting on some guys from Georgia, from Missouri, from other parts of the country. But they have to take a step up and probably win a couple more of these every cycle, right? It's been interesting to follow every cycle how many of these guys they get on campus from that part of the country. And it's just hard to hit those guys, right? Because you're competing with schools that have probably a little bit more to sell and can also sell geography. So it's a difficult task here. But I think, to me, and maybe you guys disagree, I think if they are to make in the next 2 years a couple of deep runs, if that's the outcome, that would really change this and give them an opportunity. But I think it's going to be hard to see them to really take a step recruiting, because there's a gap between like the 4 to 5 to 6 programs that recruit at a truly, truly elite level. And then Oregon's in that next group that's going to be in that 7 to 12 range, but there's just not quite on that same level. To make a leap up to reach there, they're going to have to make some on-field accomplishments happen in the next couple of cycles, I think.
100%.
And even still, I don't even think the on-field accomplishments can bring them up to that level, like to bring them to the Ohio States, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the former Clemsons. Like, I just think it's going to be such a difficult trend. I do think that moving to the Big Ten will help them eventually, just because they'll be able to showcase like the geography equation that, hey, like I know Oregon is 2,400 miles away from Ohio, but we will be playing in Ohio State, or we will be playing at Michigan or Indiana, or schools that are close in proximity to your hometown. So come on down to Eugene, Oregon. I think that'll help eventually, but the recruiting landscape, it's like three teams and then it's the rest. It's very difficult. And it's not like Oregon is not recruiting well, like we've talked about on this podcast ad nauseum. Like, they're doing quite well for themselves. It's just going to be still extremely difficult with proximity. I think Oregon gets into these recruiting battles every single season where it's like, all right, this is a really good prospect that they landed from insert Southeast state here. Will they be able to sign him on signing day? Because it's 2,500 miles away compared to going to insert state school from that state there that's 50 miles away, so that their parents can always come to see their family, their girlfriend, their friends around town. I think that's always going to be a deciding factor. And I think, the biggest part of it all is that these kids are always like 16 to 18 years old. Changes happen. It's just kind of how it goes. I don't think that Oregon is doing poorly. I think that they're going to do quite well. I just don't know. The reason why Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama are up there is because they've won multiple national championships in the last decade and a half. That's a tall task. So we'll see if they get up there. I just think it's going to be a rather steep uphill battle to do so.
Barring any flips or unexpected runs where this guy's not even considering Oregon on August 21st, Oregon has a legitimate chance at adding 4 top 100 players in the 2024 recruiting class. They've already got 1 committed, and then there's Breland and Baker and then Platt. I think you're very safe to say that Oregon probably is the leader for 2 of the 3 and is like thickly in the mix for the 1 more of those guys.
Is Baker being the one that they're in the mix for? Okay.
Yes. But I don't think any of them are like you can automatically guarantee and say that they're going to be Ducks today. Like things could shift again. But they've got a good opportunity to get 4 guys. Okay. And then you look at the 2025 class, and they have a commit in the top 100. They have a couple actually. Dallas Wilson is the highest one at 24 and 24th in the country. This is a long ways away. These rankings are going to change a lot.
Yeah.
But just from a snapshot of where things are today, the West Coast doesn't have a single recruit ranked in the top 20, and the highest rated recruit out west right now is 30th in the country. And that's Tiandre Waverly, an athlete from Washington. Oregon has offered. They are recruiting him. He's been on campus. They're trying. The next highest rated guy out west is Darius Dixon, a cornerback from California. Or Nasir Wyatt, excuse me, an edge guy from California, 40th. And then there's the cornerback that I was talking about. But there's just, to Jared's point, like there's not a lot of talent out west. And
yeah. I was just going to say 2 of those positions are skill positions, cornerback and an athlete. So probably a wide receiver, maybe a cornerback. One trench monster.
Yeah, it's just really hard for any program, not just Oregon, out west, to go out and build a roster to compete for a national championship. And if you want to do it, to Jared's point, like you got to find some trench monsters. And what Erik brought up, you got to go back east, or you got to go into the South, and you've got to win. And that's why I think Oregon is all in on Dan. But if Oregon is going to make that next jump from a team that's regularly competing for their conference championship and fighting every year to consistently be in the top 10 at the end of the season, like that's where they're kind of at right now. If they want to make that next jump where it's every year we go in thinking we've got a legitimate chance at making the college football playoff, and at that point it's anyone's game because we're equal with the other 2 or 3 teams that are consistently competing in it, they've got to win big, and it's got to be early so that, you know, the excitement of Dan from his days at Georgia is still there. His excitement of being at Oregon and working at Oregon is now there. He's got to win big, and that's why this season, if they could go 11-1 in the regular season, I think could push Oregon, not to where they're going to get equal with Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State and whatnot, but they can now start winning some of these battles where we're talking about like a Justin Williams from Texas. Like he was in love with Oregon, but ultimately went to Georgia. Like you need to start winning a couple of those battles. It doesn't have to be all the time, but to make that next jump, you need to start winning a couple of those battles.
And then just the last thing I'd throw in here, because I know this probably feels like a bit of a doom and gloom segment. I just think it's also a bit of a reality check too. The portal is kind of the big changer here, which could be a mechanism that could push a team like a TCU. I know TCU's roster wasn't entirely built on the portal, but there were some key guys there. That could be a thing that pushes Oregon over the top in a year here or there of, hey, maybe we aren't quite, maybe we're only 80% of what these guys are from a prep recruiting perspective, but we knocked it out of the park. We found a way to get the top guy at this position, that position, filled all the gaps, and now our roster is probably not as deep as still as those programs, but man, maybe the starting lineup we're able to kind of be squarely in the mix with some of these big boy programs. I think that's the other part to kind of recognize is the portal can kind of help you correct some of this. I think that's also obviously why we saw Oregon be so aggressive this year in turning over the roster. Anything else in this one?
I 100% agree with the portal. Like that will be a great equalizer for a school like Oregon, where if they can continue to recruit like they are right now, and then go out and find, you know, portal guys to add, because we talked about trench monsters. What did they do from, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys? They added 7 that are all kind of front 7 type-ish players, whether it's an offensive lineman or a defensive lineman, edge linebacker type guy. That's where Oregon will make, I think, a big jump. Fill the gaps with your talent issues at that area via portal while recruiting at a high level everywhere else, and now you're in the discussion again. So that's a good point, Eric. I'm happy you brought that up.
All right, last one is a question, but more of a request. As Jay McCallum 4 says, I would love to see a version 2.0 of last year's stocks statistics game from Jared. I enjoyed buying stock in August and then checking in at the end of the year to see where things end up. Keep up the great work. Hashtag Autzen Audibles. Jared, to you, are we doing it?
Yeah, we're going to have another stock game. And if you missed it last year, basically we had $500 of monopoly money to buy stock in an Oregon player. And I devised a formula to create a stock price. And we had a little podcast segment where we individually bought shares of each player. And then I think we had 2 checkups during the season, then one at the end of the season who took away the most money. And that was the basis of the game. It was basically a complete ripoff of the quarterback stock report game on Ryan Russillo's podcast. So if you listen to him, you'll know this fundamental concept, but it's pretty straightforward. If anybody has any suggestions on if they remember what last year's stuff, like, feel free to tweet at me, to DM me on Twitter or X or whatever the hell you want to call it, at Jared_Max7. So any requests, feel free. My formula is pretty primal. It's pretty like bare bones, basic nothingness, but it does the job. So I think we're going to bring it back. We'll probably have some podcast segment about it next week. Probably not too long, but should we keep the $500 of monopoly money in the same total?
I like it.
Yeah, I like it.
Okay. All right. So $500 of monopoly money to everybody. And then I'll have a spreadsheet up. I guess post it on our message board if people are so inclined, but if not, I'll send it to you guys.
I think maybe we open this up to those in the YouTube comments if they want to do the process. Jared, maybe you can link the kind of the chart that has all of the values and stock prices, and people, if they want to build their own $500 teams, maybe we can make it a bit of an open competition and include some others other than ourselves, if that's something we think we can do.
I mean, that just means significantly more work for me.
Then let's not do that.
We'll see. Yeah, right now it's 3 people is pretty good right now. I don't need
Oh, I wasn't saying you
people.
didn't have to keep track of it. I just meant people could pick their team.
They get to keep track of it.
They can track their own scores, and if they want to chime in at the end with how they did, just to make it a little bit more interactive.
Works.
Yeah.
If Jared doesn't seem anywhere near as enthusiastic as I am, so we will maybe shelf that one. But either way, the 3 of us will do teams.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we'll do teams.
Yes. All right, that's gonna do it for us on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Until the next one, thank you for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.